every session with you is gold. And I really loved all your comments. And I'm going to go through table to table, but we had almost everyone participate today. There are a few people short, and we want today's class to be 100% participation. Everybody has. I have a surprise for you today as we unpack the next phase, and I ask our guest to turn their camera on. So if our guest can turn their camera on. Wow. And I'm so thrilled that Riccardo Meriti is joining us. Riccardo Meriti has been such a great friend of Thunderbird, but also a leader worldwide in pushing the forefront of agile thinking. When I first met Jeff Sutherland, and Jeff invited me to dinner to his home, and we were sitting and speaking. We spoke about agile leaders we admire. Riccardo Meriti came up, and we were connected, and we have become deep collaborators ever since. Riccardo's restaurant has been a place of pilgrimage for leaders around the world. The head of the European Central Bank have visited Riccardo's restaurant to see what agile practices they can take back, and many, many other executives from Silicon Valley. So Riccardo, I'm so glad you were able to listen to all the wonderful comments of students from the morning. And as you know, in our agile culture, we are all learning and growing. So let's get back into our conversation as to where we were. Riccardo starts this experiment. We're going to talk about and unpack in this discussion the different roles of Scrum, but more than that, the Lucy moment, what happened. The other insights that Riccardo has. So Riccardo, over to you, and then we're going to get into Q&A. And I am so proud of this class. I loved all of your comments. They were absolutely brilliant. And let's keep asking Riccardo tough questions.
Good morning. Lovely. Thank you so much. Can you hear me, Euvin? I've learnt so much today. It's wonderful. It's wonderful to revisit that whole story with fresh eyes as well. So no, I'm very, very grateful for the feedback and would love to collaborate and serve in any way I can to answer questions. So please,
let's kick off,
ask me
in terms
anything.
of, from what you've heard, really golden nuggets of feedback in the class. Any thoughts and comments? Why did you start this? Why did you start this journey? Such a tough.
I realized, I'd been in the business. We opened a restaurant in 1995. I'd been there for about 2 or 3 years before. And we'd been blessed to have tremendous success right from the start. But it came a point when our margins were being eroded, and I had to do something. And I'd always been a big reader, and somebody had recommended 2 books which just jumped out at me. One was Team of Teams by General McChrystal, which I absolutely love, and it's just the most incredible story of how the general actually broke down the silos from so many departments of government through to political arena and brought it into the battlefield. But the effects were incredible. They went from sort of 3 months to never reaction time. 2 years later, they got it down to about 20 minutes reaction time. I was so inspired by reading this idea of sharing information. And the second one was the Scrum book, Jeff Sutherland's Scrum book. And when I read that, I started implementing Scrum immediately with my marketing department, and we did phenomenally well. And they managed to increase. They did about 4 times the amount of work over a 12-week period that they'd done beforehand. They were much happier and they loved it. And when we tried to implement that framework and become more agile in the restaurant, I realized that I was just out of my depth and I had to learn a little bit more. And so it was. I went. I was very lucky to go and get some really good training. I went and trained, as Professor Euvin said, with Jeff Sutherland and a lot of very well-known agile practitioners. Got to visit some lovely companies, Bosch, 3M. We went to Tesla for a week, which we got a tour around the factory and really spent some time with some of the people working there. And I realized that there was a different way of working. I'd always kind of had an inkling that there could be, I didn't know how to put words into it, but a flatter organization or whatever. But everybody in my business said I was mad. It was that thing. If you give them an inch, they take a mile. People always, if you give them any freedom at all, they take advantage, and so on. Looking back now, I certainly realized that that is not the case. I think one of the biggest things that I had to do was to reduce decision latency. I realized that with social media, right now, a customer can walk into the restaurant, they can have a bad experience, and they can trash your reputation online within 5 seconds before they've even left the restaurant. And you can never take that away. Once they give you a bad review, it's gone. And so the game's changed, the game from when I first went into it. When I first went into the restaurant business, we were using fax machines. There was no email. We had a landline telephone. Nobody had a mobile phone. You had time. People would write you a physical letter, which would arrive 2 weeks later. There were just different ways to pass on information. So I think that the world changed, and we realized that, something had to change, or we had to shut the business down. So we thought, well, we'll try it. And the thing I love about the Agile community is it's like everything's meant to be fun and everything's meant to be a small experiment. Let's try it. If it doesn't work, we'll just change the way we approach it. Rather than having this sort of being a supreme architect, we say, okay, let's let it evolve. And it's very light touch leadership. And I think that sometimes it's actually much more difficult to allow somebody to make a mistake even when you know how to do the thing properly. You give them the freedom because that's the only way they ever learn. And so allowing them to make their own mistakes looks like a terrible decision early on in the game. But actually, as it pans out, they become more intelligent. The team becomes more intelligent. The teams start to learn to make decisions for themselves. And I think it's transferable to everything they do, not just in the restaurant business. When they leave the restaurant, they go to do other things. A lot of half my team are students. So we have them sort of in vacation, holiday time. They have a lot more time to work with us. And then there are sometimes they have to go off and do their studies. And I think that a lot of what they learn, they are able to transfer. I think they're able to transfer a lot of what they learn into their everyday life.
And so let's do a couple of things. We just have a terrific class. I'm so proud of each and every person here, Riccardo. I want to go around the room, table for table, particularly those that have not spoken today, to get your questions in, because everyone always has insights. Okay, so I'm turning to the people on tables that may not have had a comment. Okay, so get your questions ready if you're comfortable. You have first preference to come in. And so take us to that moment as we get your questions ready in tables for those that have not spoken. Go for it. This is your opportunity. It can be on anything. Take us to this moment, Riccardo. You come back from the journey with Sutherland and others, and you go to your chef and your maitre d'. Are you expecting them to be excited? You've gone up the mountain. You say, "Wow, I see this vision of how things can be."
It's slightly different. What happened was that I did my first Scrum. It was a Scrum course. It was actually an Agile hardware course in Sweden, and that's where I got to meet Henrik Nyberg. He's such a phenomenal human being, and he's become a great friend since then. Everybody was so supportive. They're saying, you know, this is such a great thing. We've seen about it in software. We've got some sort of modern companies that are set up like Lego and those type of things that they were doing tremendously well. But a restaurant, it's like, its hierarchy is built into the structure. You know, you've got a general manager, a restaurant manager, assistant manager, a head of reception. You have so many labels, and people do not like to move outside of their domains. And so everybody was extremely supportive of that. I came back from that very excited and told my team what I was going to do, and gave them all the Scrum book again and asked them to read it. And when I met Henrik Nyberg, I said, should I come back and train with you, or should I go and train with Jeff Sutherland? And he said, funny you say that. I'm actually teaching a Scrum course with Jeff Sutherland here in Sweden in 2 weeks' time. And it's our 10th anniversary. We teach together every year. It's a full class, but if you apply, I'll make sure you get a place in the class. And so he arranged that. So when I told my team that I was going back to do some more training with the founder of Scrum, they realized I was serious, and my head chef and manager handed in their notice just before I left. So when I came back, it was already done. I knew they were leaving. It's funny, I don't know if you've ever experienced that, where you're reading a book and you know you want to do something, and you're having a conversation in your mind as to how you're going to talk to your team or your friend or whatever it is about the thing. I had this conversation, and the two people I really dreaded having this conversation with were my head chef and my manager, and they happened to be, so they both, as I said, they were gone. So in a way, I was very relieved. I saw the way they worked, and they were mini Gordon Ramsays.
You were super successful, profit, that model was working. And then you decide to say you're going to embark on possibly the toughest form of cultural change. Now, we went through how the roster, the self-organization, that was the first experiment where the team took it and they got a taste of what's working. Not only were they doing it faster, but something else that you discovered through that roster process. Take us through that as we build up to the famous Lucy moment. So everything seemed to have been going well before that.
Yeah, I tell you what was really exciting was we discovered 15% on average, some weeks, some months when we did an audit later, as much as 30% of people were being scheduled to work in the restaurant that weren't really needed. And the team saw that. It wasn't, we saw it together. It was that like real aha moment, because each person had a Post-it note in their hand. And by the time we'd filled up the roster for the week ahead, they still had Post-its in their hand. They said, yeah, but I normally do 8 shifts, and I normally do 10 shifts, but what am I going to do? So we allowed them to put their shifts on and work the shifts as they had normally. But we were very aware that every week that there were more people being scheduled by the managers than the company really needed. And as an experiment, that was one of my first jobs that I gave to the team. And I said, look, if you want to be a self-organizing team, you've got to try to help me fix this. So they collaborated with each other, they talked to each other. Some of the students said they needed more time and they felt obliged to do the work that they'd been scheduled by the managers. So they wanted to take, and within several weeks, we had normalized the rota, and we were only scheduling what the company really needed.
There were extra people on the shifts to cater for in case someone doesn't turn up. You had to build in that buffer and extra time. Likewise, in big teams, when you get multiple projects, and there doesn't seem to be any order in what's coming your way, and you don't have a clear purpose, you try and build in this buffer. So when someone says, how long will it take? You know it's going to take 2 weeks, or say 4 weeks of uncertainty. So what they're trying to do is remove the noise. But there's a powerful moment in the case when Lucy comes up, and we want to have that honest conversation in terms of how that came up, and what was your thought process in that decision? Because agile transformations are not like this, where everything is going great. The really great ones are like this, because you are tackling hard cultural things that people don't talk about. This is a famous thing. Lucy gets her voice. That's how we call it. Take us to that moment.
I think that the key issue here, the main point is that all of these issues had always existed. It's just they got suppressed by the structure of the management structure. Nobody felt they could speak, because if they did speak, they felt that they were in danger of losing their job. They would be labeled as a troublemaker and so on. So I really tried to allow everybody. We established, for example, what we called an amnesty pattern, where we said, okay, you can say anything you want about anybody on the team as long as you say it in front of the other person, but you've got to do it within a small period of time. You've got to do it by Sunday every week. Otherwise, we don't want you coming in and saying, oh, I'm not happy about something that's been going on for 3 months, and handing in their notice. We wanted to be able to fix things in real time. And so one of the Scrum values is courage, another one is respect. So we said, have the courage to speak up, but do it in a respectful way. You don't need to be abusive, but you can tell the truth, and you can talk about the way you feel. And so it was a lot of coaching to try to get people to have a voice. And it was very liberating thinking. She's 16 when she came to work for us. She was just 17, I think, when this situation came up. And she's dealing with people who were in their late 30s, early 40s. And they were trying to bully her. And I said to the team, if you can't sort it out amongst yourselves, I'm going to shut the restaurant for a week. And then I'm going to reopen it, and everybody can reapply for a job. I didn't see another way out, because they were being so aggressive with her. I had to say at some point, so I was saying to Professor Naidu recently, I think true mastery in leadership or management is being able to be anywhere on the continuum, from full command and control to anarchy. You've got to allow to make a real transition, or to innovate a product or innovate your leadership style. Sometimes you have to let things get slightly out of control, but you have to be able to pull back. It's a bit like somebody saying, I'm a pacifist, but they don't know how to fight. You know, it's only meaningful if you can actually fight. And you say, I choose not to fight because I can. But you need to have the power to be able to step in. And when you see something that is totally wrong, or let's say if the building was on fire, you have to sometimes push everybody out of the way and put the fire out. If you see somebody who's being abusive, there have to be some rules. There has to be some accountability. And I think the more freedom you give, the more responsible people have to be. And so there is that weird point when you're trying to, for me anyway, from my experience, and I've heard from other people who've been through the same thing, because I talk to a lot of people about their agile journeys. And there's that point where you actually do need to have a set of rules. It's my preferred option that the team make the rules themselves. But if you see somebody doing something which, in my opinion, is borderline criminal, You know, bullying a 16, 17-year-old girl who has got the courage to speak up and saying she's got to go, she's a troublemaker, I think is really, really unethical and immoral and not the right thing to do. Wonderful. So I felt I need to step in at that point.
Yep. Let's open it up.
Could I have done it in a lighter way?
I
don't know.
Preference given to those that
I don't know.
Sorry, go ahead, Riccardo. My apologies.
But it worked. Two weeks. Two weeks later, they were all friendly with each other. They'd kind of, you know, it's really weird in relationships when you actually speak the truth and you hold your space and nobody's allowed to leave and you've got to solve the problem. They solved it. And to this day, they're still working together. Lucy's now back with us for the 5th time. She's left and she came back. She's now back with us. And she's been through college. She's done all of that. She's now back. And the lady she had the biggest problem with, she's still back, and they get on incredibly well.
Let's enjoy
in fact, the professor's
every moment.
Spoken to them both.
Questions. Go for it, Gibson.
Yeah. Okay, I've got a question. When
any questions?
Actually bought the next kitchen which was about to be closed, and then you started to do the same thing, like you used the same team to actually manage the new setup that you had, and you were doing like the MVP kind of thing, make sure that all things are working together. I've got a question for you from an agile perspective and as a leader. To how did you manage? You have these 4 people working with you in this current restaurant, and now you have got another restaurant where you have to open and do all these things, and you're using the same people. How did you like maybe mix and match with the people where the new restaurant, or how did you work that one out? Didn't you neglect the other restaurant in trying to make sure that the new restaurant was actually being operated?
So we're going to take it. How do we take it? We'll take them in batches of 3. And just to clarify, you're talking about when Harry's hairdresser asked for a menu to supply the kitchen.
Are we talking about the
so
Harry's?
We'll clarify that. It wasn't buying a new restaurant.
Yeah.
It was, and Riccardo, you can take him through the actual situations. But great question. How did you respond to Harry's MVP? Let's get 2 more questions. We do them in batches of 3. Fantastic. James.
Yeah. What have you done in terms of adjustments, or how have you bettered the agile practices in the restaurant since the time of the case? Because we see one point of view, and obviously you've had time since then. So what have you done to better those practices?
What a big question. Right. The last one, we're going to do the last one, and we're going to do another batch. Cheat sheets, yours. Nice and loud.
Have you ever questioned those people who suggest to fire Lucy or bully her? Those people, you question them about, it is us to choose to hire Lucy, but you still choose to fire her whatsoever. And technically she didn't do anything wrong. And it was you guys who didn't follow the schedule. And why would you say to fire her instead of thinking about if there's any problem with yourself?
Good one. So get ready for the next batch. Go for it. Any order, Riccardo. MVP, the hairdresser situation.
No, I'll handle it in the order that they came up. So the Harry's hairdresser was a really interesting one, based on the knowledge I had at the time. I realized that the one thing that's going to slow down. So just in case, to give you a tiny bit of background, we were asked to do something. We were to cater for the local hairdressing salon. They said they had 2 to 3 weeks before their chef left. Could we do something? We were just about to start our meetings and collaborate with that and come up with some ideas. We get a phone call the next morning. They say, he found
We had a
out
kitchen.
that we're going to be using you. He's
You were
upset and
asking,
he's
this is
left.
Riccardo, our chef is
And
leaving.
can you do anything
you
for us
actually now
today?
be the person to step in?
And yeah. Yeah, and so I called my team and I said, okay, what do we need? And so we had our marketing team there, our front of house team, the waiters and waitresses. They were the ones who were going to be doing the delivery. I had my chef in, and I had all our key personnel in that particular day. And by key personnel, I mean people on my team who had the most experience, who would probably be of most value in that project planning. But what we realized is that we didn't have time to go back and forward, so I phoned the hairdressers and said, I need somebody from your operations, and they sent their manager, and I need somebody from your finance department, and they sent Harry's son, who was the accountant, down. And we sat around a table, and within several hours we formulated the plan, and by lunchtime that day, we were able to serve the first meal. And I think it was just that the team were used to sitting down together and collaborating and talking to each other. We removed outside dependencies, and therefore there was nobody outside of this group that we needed to make a decision. And we were able to agree on everything. We painted the picture of what the vision was going to look like. We were able to demonstrate some ideas in real time while they were sitting in the restaurant. And the first meal and the menu pretty much stayed unchanged for the next 18 months. We stopped doing it around COVID time because they were closed down for nearly 18 months. And that was very prohibitive for them. So we didn't, but up until that time, the thought process, the planning, everything that we had done in that short period of time in that morning was enough to actually come up with a minimum viable product for the business. And actually we evolved it by working on process efficiency. We would count how long it would take for somebody to walk up there with a tray and, without any impediments, and then turn around and say, okay, this is what we're aiming for. And so they knew what to expect. They knew that when they phoned us or they sent a text, in the end, we ended up doing it by WhatsApp. And so when they sent a WhatsApp message, they knew that within that period of time, they should be able to get, a full meal to their people, and we streamlined it. And it ended up being very successful for us. It was a good exercise, number one, but also very exciting to see all the stakeholders were had a vested interest in making it work because they helped create it. So the manager, the accountant from Harry's, and my team, they created it.
It's
there
terrific.
wasn't one
and let's
person.
just double
It was
click
just,
because
I think there were
it's so important that
there were 9 of us
prior to the Harry's MVP,
collaborating.
you had
talking,
worked to build the muscle
communicating.
memory of the team.
We were able to come up
We
with
had done those
an idea and get it
exercises
working very
of practicing,
quickly.
of coming
I don't know if that
together,
answers the
cleaning the
question.
back, the teams cross-functional, getting a backlog up, making it visible. And so I know when we spoke, one thing you shared is that before Agile, you don't think, if you had got a call on the day from a company saying, hey, can you come up with a menu or process and deliver, it's unlikely you would have had the muscle memory to respond. So share that you followed this Agile principle based on muscle memory, getting the different stakeholders, co-locating, reducing friction costs, getting the people from the other company to come, so there's a reduction in the back and forth. And the kitchen was linked in because they had become more linked in with what's happening. So what got you to delivering that MVP? It wasn't just like it happened overnight. Any
Yeah, I think one of the key issues that we don't talk about that much really is that we just abolished all job titles. So it wasn't, it was just, we're all there, we agreed we're all there to do a job, and whatever needs to be done, we're going to do it. And I just very blessed that I had a team who kind of got that, and they really gelled with that. And still to this day, they like it. We don't have, for the outside world, you might have somebody, can I speak to the manager? But any team member can go over and talk to the customer when they ask for that. So it's just like, how can I help you? It's whoever's there will go and answer that. But I think that really helped.
Come back to this, and later
and
on,
the other thing was really encouraging
agile. That's where they go.
Front of house to go and work in the kitchen to come and work in the front of house, even 1 or 2 shifts every month.
Even the servant leader on your team, this is not hierarchical. How do you practice?
Just so they had a shared understanding. Yeah. We found that when we called somebody a Scrum Master or a product owner, they just became a de facto manager. And so for about 2 years, we used to say things like, okay, who wants to have the vision for this? So, we take the role, like the product owner role, and we say, okay, it's a visionary, it's somebody who's collaborating with customers and team members. So instead of saying, hey, do you want to be a product owner? It's like, who would like to lead this part of the project and come up with a vision? And there'd always be somebody who had a really good idea, wanted to be creative. And so you could really allow the function to happen without giving somebody a role title. Going back into this, I think, was it James, said the question 2 about adjustments, better practices. I think that the thing that really hit us was we started working, there's a little bit of this in the case study you see about process efficiency. We started counting with a stopwatch how long it took for a customer to walk in through the door, sit there, get greeted by a team member, seated, menu, first drink on the table. And so we were able to actually put numbers on every single part. So if you did it in rehearsal before a customer was in, I might be training some new team members. I would ask half the team to go outside and pretend to be a customer, and the other half I'd say, let's do this as quickly as we can. There's no phones ringing, there's nothing else. And we'd work out and we'd say, okay, the best we've managed to do is, let's say, I can't remember the exact numbers, I haven't got them in front of me. Let's say it was 1.5, 2 minutes for a customer to sit down and get their first drink. And then I would make the new recruit sit down with me during a typical service and get the stopwatch going with a real customer, with real team members, and we'd see what the process efficiency was. And let's say it was 1.5 minutes was our target time, and they would turn around to me and say, oh my God, it's taken 6 minutes for that person to get a drink. They're working off a 25% process efficiency. And it's like, okay, how could they have got faster? So people were they were educating themselves because they knew what the numbers were. They knew what the criteria for good service was. I'm not saying that if people go to the restaurant and they want to have a romantic evening, that they should be served quickly. That's not the point. They should be served at the pace they want to be served, but we should be able to serve them quickly if they need it. If somebody needs to get to the airport, we need to be able to adapt with the pace. So I think that was one of the big ways that we had this we're always trying to get constant improvement in what we do. The big test though was when COVID came, and we were told within that afternoon that by midnight tonight you can't operate as a restaurant. And we got together with the team and I said, does anybody feel unsafe by this? How do you feel about working? And everybody except one said, no, we really don't want to go home, we want to work. And so we agreed to pivot the restaurant and become a deli, really focus on home delivery. We even, there was a shortage of everything, and a lot of the things there was a shortage of, we were able to get hold of. So things like toilet paper, just basic commodities. And we said, okay, let's do this as a service to the community. Let's not try to make a big profit out of this. We'll just sell at what we think is a reasonable price, and at a small markup. But let's do this for a bit of fun. And I think we built a lot of goodwill with the local community. And then when we were able to go back to running a restaurant, we had to do that social distancing again. We had a lot of outdoor dining, so we had to build some outdoor tents, and we had to build fires because it was cold at the time. I think we were able to adapt much quicker again because of that that mindset, that inbuilt encouragement. When we first started the restaurant, I think I said this right at the beginning, we created this police force that just stopped any change. And when I realized what I'd done, I realized that I created a structure that just didn't allow for any innovation. And once we broke that down, it was great fun for team members, because there was no longer, oh, can I organize a wedding or can I organize a party? And it was like, well, even if somebody had only been there for a week or 2 weeks and it was, they were relatively new on the job, you'd say, what a wedding should look like. Why don't you help the customer organize it? And we would encourage somebody any team member to realize that they were as responsible for making a beautiful wedding as somebody who'd been in the restaurant for 10 years. So it was a big transformation.
If I understand it,
in the way they
the
think.
group that wanted Lucy fired, Lucy wasn't doing anything wrong. And how could this even be when someone is not doing something wrong? Go ahead.
I can't remember what that was. I started writing it down, and then I
who joined the decision process of hiring Lucy, and they
yeah.
said, "Okay, she's a troublemaker. Just fire her." But you are the person who decided to hire her. Then, is it possibly because your decision is wrong or something, or you just regret what you decide to do? Am I clear?
Interestingly, Lucy was actually the last person that my old manager had recruited, and she was very, very well trained. I try, with the team members, what I like to do is I trained as a mediator years ago. A friend of mine was a judge in Texas, and he did a lot of mediation courses in Houston, and part of it is just learning, I think, to be a mediator and not try to get too involved in the process, but create the environment where the transformation can happen. So I wasn't really I was more concerned, I don't know if I'm answering your question, but I'll try to. I was more concerned with putting the right environment in place so that the team members could learn from each other and understand each other better than I was in trying to make somebody wrong by saying, I do understand if you've got a child and somebody's threatening you and they're saying, you should be closing at night. Why should I? I don't know if we said in the case study, but Lucy, it came up because 3 days in a row, she had left the restaurant at 2:00 in the morning, and she had to leave home because she lived, when she left late because we closed, she missed her train. And so she had to take a bus home. So it took her about an hour and a half, 2 hours to get home. And then she had to be the first one back to open up 3 days in a row. And she just said, I'm so tired, I can't do my schoolwork. So the only other solution was one of these people who were also tired because they had families and their things, was they have to now do it. and they weren't used to that. The managers had always protected them. They said, this person's got good skill set, we need to make sure, give them special
Let's get our next
treatment.
round of
And
questions.
so I tried to remove that from the equation. But I did understand
So you
both
brought
sides.
in this big
I
change
think
in
that,
the
you know, both of them had a valid
and
point,
change
but if
happens
we
when
were going to
people
create
also
something new, we
So
had to sort
what
it out.
change did you see in the attitude of your employees when you brought in this change?
Change in attitude. Let's get, yes.
So thank you, Ricardo, for this opportunity. When we read the case, what happened to me is like reading a story, right? And you get a certain point attached with the characters. So when Professor Nayu show you the case and you have the first view of the case, and you see with a different eyes your whole business, what were your impressions and what were your learning moments?
One more. Let's see who haven't we heard from, who haven't we heard from, who haven't. Yes. Yes. Nice and loud.
How did you evaluate or rate the staff outcome in the roster? And because it's related with the real world, and
Great
real world
question.
also connected with the motivation. So did you do peer review or has some kind of system to the evaluate to the staff or crew?
Go through one more time. There was some wonderful, but there are a couple of questions in there. So one more time.
Did you have some kind of system of the evaluate to the staff or crew? Because you know the reward and evaluate is the most important thing to the staff or workers. So that is related with motivation. So
Great. So evaluation methodology, terrific, very important. Okay, and it's our first batch of 3, but I saw so many hands. Let's get those that have not. You look. I like that.
I said no, I don't have a
I
question.
know. I'm looking at it.
That's a great question, and it's
Other restaurants been inspired, and anyone else? I just want to make sure. This Jack, you got it.
Yeah, I was looking at your website for your restaurant.
So I think-
Food looks phenomenal. But you mentioned your story of visiting Florence and seeing your grandma when you were younger and going to a restaurant with your friends, and that's where you were really first inspired to open your restaurant. I want to know if adopting Agile in your restaurant has allowed you to better capture the essence of what you first sought out to do, or how has that enabled you to do that?
Go for it.
well. Can I jump straight into that one? Just while we're, I mean that's such a good point, because when we first started, we were so agile it was a joke. We had no idea what we were doing. I learned to cook because I had a very bad experience with a chef, so I really empathized with the gentleman who was mentioning earlier that he had problems with the chefs in the past, and so we used to cook food and run upstairs and give it to the customers, watch their reaction, get feedback, and we were evolving everything based on that first vision that I'd seen in Italy back in right at the beginning. We got very lost, I think. As we got busier and busier and busier, we started to actually formulate what customers liked, and we created a formula. And then there was that I did quite a lot of, I didn't know how to run a business. I'd been in a real estate business before that, and I just worked with one assistant, and that was it. So I had no idea how to run a P&L, how to run systems and so on. So I started studying sort of traditional management, and it was standard operating procedures and a police force to police that. So we've pushed that in place, and I think agility, which is, I like that question so much, it allowed us to go back to where we were at the beginning and become a startup again. But it became, I feel as though, and I've got a lot more news, of what's happened recently, of how we really are in perpetual startup mode. So I think it's a very exciting way to be. Going on to the question, the third question, which was about evaluating the crew. I particularly like that because we don't do it anymore. There are no individual evaluations. All we're interested in is how do you work as a team. So there's no rewards, individual rewards, because we don't want these superstar players, these strikers, the Beckhams, or I don't know who, these sports stars who tend to be slight prima donnas, but we just don't want that. We want the team to work and help each other. We know that everybody in life has a bad day, so we need the team to support those people when they're having a bad day, knowing that the team will support them in turn when they're having a bad day. It's just like, so it's all about why are we in the business in the first place? We're there to serve. We're there to serve our customers. We're there to serve each other. And so we don't look at any individual evaluations other than when we have new team members, or if there's a problem with a team member, we talk about it as a group. Nobody's allowed to say anything bad about a team member unless that team member's present, and I encourage everybody to speak at every meeting as to what they think should be improved. And what they've kind of come up with a very interesting style of that, where they don't mention the person's name, but they say what's been happening. So they'll say, there's a couple of team members who, I'm not going to say their name, but they keep asking to go home early. And it's really making me feel demoralized and blah, blah, blah. And then we just get the whole team say, should anybody go home early? This happened recently, actually. And we came up with a system, said, okay, it's got to be a fair system for going home early. Because January can be a bit of a weird, you go up and down on a January, it can be a bit cold outside, and we had the World Cup on recently, or whatever it might be, and people want to watch the football. So just suddenly people don't go out. So yes, somebody should go home. It's good for business. We don't have to pay overtime. We don't have to pay so many team members. But let's have a fair system for that. And then we encourage the team members to do that. So they evaluate each other.
Just a couple of things while we're on this evaluation.
They normally bring it up in a team meeting. We have 2 meetings a day, every day.
We are going to get into
and 3 meetings on a Saturday and
but
3 meetings on a
Wednesday.
Wednesday.
Go back to some of the conversations both of us
that's
had with
about
Jeff,
the only time that I am mandated to spend
Jeff always
with the team,
says
and apart
this
from that,
traditional
they've been
cooperation
really
of having a
running the
mid-year
restaurant
review.
beautifully.
In an ideal world, and you will be leaders that can choose the spectrum. This is not to say Agile has this extreme spectrum. It takes a lot culture-wise to get there. Most times you'll be entering organizations that are somewhere else on the spectrum. And this is normal, not good or bad. But in that world, number one, you said no job title. Interesting.
Yeah.
You will always bump into HR, those that are pushing extreme agility. How can you have no job title? How do you do bonuses? Jeff always says, in a true agile function, there is no evaluation, because when's the evaluation happening? And you always practice this. Work is visible. You know how you're doing. And the evaluation is happening all the time. So share that mindset in terms of this thing that we have to have this review at the midpoint, which everyone knows, the manager usually does want to have it. The person does want to have it. Yeah, good, let's move on. So the whole goal is that there's no surprises. So any thoughts on that, Riccardo? Because you've pushed it quite far. mindset in terms of this thing that you have anything that's going to happen, first thing that's going to happen, I'll get going to put the next on. So the whole goal is that there's no surprise, so any thoughts on that?
I mean, such an interesting point. I had 26 managing directors come from the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development. They came and they had a series of dinners at the restaurant because they were going through a massive agile transformation. And one of the biggest problems they had is that they say, what is the career progression when we go agile? You know, we have this kind of standard career progression built up over the years. You're telling us we should throw that out. And there were lots of discussions over that. And it's just like, well, what do we want? You know, if we want success at the project level, we have to reward project success or product success independent of people. Sometimes you can have a person who's sitting quietly in the corner and doesn't appear to be doing very much because they're quietly spoken, and yet they were the one who came up with the idea. And in a traditional way, the one with the loudest mouth, who's the biggest, you know, character, who's charismatic, will get all of the credit for what happened. But if we turn around and say, if you have non-performers on your team, then it's the team's responsibility to bring that to the attention of the executive team. And they either need to be moved to a different team or moved out of the company altogether, but only when they get a lot of feedback. So it's about getting real-time feedback on performance. If we're not happy, Jack Welch said this in one of his books. He said, if you have to let somebody go from your organization and they are even remotely surprised, then shame on you, you're a bad leader. And so it's like that constant feedback, not 6 months later and then it's too late for you to do something about it. It's feedback right now in real time, but it's got to be done in a respectful way and in a way that's I think there's a lot of politics goes into assessments. And if you look at the statistics, there's a lot written on that, you know, that all we're interested in is creating a wonderful environment where people can thrive, people can feel happy coming to work, they spend more time with their co-workers than they do with their families. You know, that's just the way of life, you know. And so, yeah, I think that, I mean, Sutherland said to me that, you know, the fastest teams, the best teams he ever had, they had no job titles. That's what I got the ideas from other people. Well, I didn't make any of this up. I just heard some ideas that resonated. And I think with all these things, there isn't one way of doing it. You're going to leave Professor Naidu's course and you're going to say, oh, I've got 100 possible tools I can use here. And now I can see I've got a really low risk way of implementing them because I'm only going to try it for a week. And if things get better, we're going to carry on. And if they don't, I'm going to get feedback daily from my team and I can reverse my decision. And if you can get out of that thing of we want to make mistakes because it's only in making mistakes that we find the way that works, because we need to eliminate what doesn't work. So you're going to have 100, 200 ideas of little things, and there is nobody who can supreme architect out any project. If they say they can, I think it's not true. Truly successful projects always emerge. They emerge based on a little bit of information that you get each day. If you try to plan it too far in advance, you kill any of the creativity in the project. Impressions that I got from when I first saw the case. It was interesting because I had written a journal about my experiences, and I shared that with Professor Naidu and another professor at Harvard. because they asked me to come and give a talk there. And it was really exciting to see some of it was all the elements that were from the heart. You know, it was about, it was interesting to see which elements that resonated with the professors. And it was all about the humanity part. It's how do humans behave with each other? How do we create a better environment? And I think that that's very much what Jeff Sutherland is about. You know, he wants to create a better world. It's not, and you create a better world by creating a wonderful environment for team members to work in. And at the same time, when people are happy, they create beautiful things. So, you know, I know there's a lot of bad publicity about Tesla, but when I was at Tesla, people who worked there seemed to be quite happy. I actually don't know many people who work there. Maybe you do, and maybe you've heard firsthand. But I think there's a lot of the bad PR they got was their competition. Painting the company out to be an awful place to work and irresponsible and so on. But certainly wasn't my experience seeing that environment where people were very free. They have a rule there which is called the rule of 2 feet, and it's your job to go and walk to where you think you can be of most value. So if you're not being of any value in this room right now, it's your job to leave this room right now and go to be where you should be being more valuable. And so there's that, again, it's going back that thing of when you give people autonomy and you give the team members choice, they have to be super responsible. But when everybody does it, it's wonderful. There's a certain magic that comes out. There was a question about changing. What changes did I see in the team? The environment forced everybody to change. Because when a new team member came in, we taught them how to train themselves. And one of the things we like team members to work together in pairs. And traditionally what had happened was somebody would come in, it would take them 6 months before they were allowed to take an order. I like people taking an order within the second day. First day they need to learn the menu and they go down to the kitchen. By the second day they should be taking an order, but they should be taking an order with an experienced team member right next to them. And it's very, very tough, I think I said this earlier, for somebody who can do something fast to allow somebody else to do it very slowly and to encourage them to it's always that thing of like, oh, you have to go through your rite of passage. You've got to suffer like I did for 6 months and wait in order to have the right. And yet, who suffers? The customers suffer. The team members suffer. And so I think that the mindset was
to others.
When we start working together and we start swarming around the jobs together, everything looks very chaotic at first, but there's a very, very fast, within 6 to 8 weeks, the team suddenly gel and they get it.
Your example has it inspired
they become much,
others?
much more intelligent in the job. Inspiration in what way, Professor? Well, it was great. I became a Scrum trainer because I wanted to learn more about Scrum, and Jeff Sutherland said that's going to be the best way for you to learn, and so he allowed me to go on some of his to co-teach with him. And they were teaching at a hotel very close to my restaurant. So they always do a happy hour on a 2-day course. At the end of day 1, they do a happy hour. And so we started hosting the happy hours. So we had BP, 3M, Tesla, Merck, European Bank. We had all these companies coming in that were training. They want to train with Jeff Sutherland because he was one of the founders of Scrum, and they wanted to go to Source. And we had sort of middle management and mid to senior management coming in and so on. And then from that, we had a lot of people saying, hey, could I bring my team down here? We want to have some lunches. We had a little private room next door, and we would host lunches. And especially up until lockdown, we were doing probably at least one lunch or dinner a week from an Agile group who wanted to come in and have a tour of the restaurant and meet the team and so on. And I think that it was that thing of, well, as we said before, I mean, possibly half the room, when you put your hands up earlier on, if you've had some experience in the restaurant business, I think statistically about 50% of the population of the Western world have worked in a restaurant or a bar at some point in their career. And so we're all familiar with the way they work. And then if people can actually understand how we've deconstructed that, then there doesn't seem to be an excuse not to do it somewhere else.
Got some recognition. There was a small group of professors that decided to write a case.
Everyone's trying to get buy-in.
Very honored to do
and
that.
the one secret sauce with all of this is sharing the vision every single day, multiple times a day. It's not something you do once. It's
just
something
over
that
10
you
minutes
have to constantly talk to your team about.
Time for maybe one more round of questions. So who have we not heard from? I think today's an amazing class. Everybody has spoken on every table. Takashi, we're going to give you one more. We're going to take 3 more questions. And then we're going to see if we can answer them really fast because I want some time for reflection. So Takashi, you're on. Question?
Yes.
Yes.
So thank you so much. So we led a great step to implement Agile at your restaurant. But as you mentioned in the case, the last chapter, the Agile practice are easy to understand and hard to implement. So my question is about your deep thought process, mentality and feeling under such a high pressure and a lot of trouble, chaos situation as a product owner. So as a product owner, why could you keep this great mindset or positive thinking? What is the origin source to implement Agile? How to overcome hard things and implement Agile?
Let's focus on that. Let's answer that question because my understanding that Takashi has closed the gap and made a record of every person speaking today. A quick round of applause to the class. Okay.
As a product owner, why positive thinking? What is the origin source to implement Agile? How to overcome hard things?
Okay. So, firstly, to keep inspired, hang around with very inspired agilists who can validate what you're doing, because very often everybody says you're wrong. And so you need a certain amount of certainty there. But the one skill I would suggest is, for me, the most important, and the thing that helped me the most, was the ability to boot up a scrum team or an agile team. I used the little checklist at the back of Jeff Sutherland's Scrum book every time. I keep going back to that. Who's got the vision? Who's going to solve the impediments? How do I get everything relevant to the team visible? How do we prioritize our work? How do we try to only work on the most important things? And we start to go through it and then be willing to reboot the teams regularly. This is not once, it's not like, oh, we're just going to plug this in and it's done. Things get, as you said just now, things get chaotic. You're in this chaotic environment. So you have to be able to regroup. And the best way is to reboot the team. Change the visionary, change the person who solves the problem. Make fluid roles so that you don't ever get, we got the point where people start to gravitate towards, oh, I'm going to do the rota this week. Oh, I'm going to do the rota next week. I'm going to do the rota. Oh, the same person doing the rota 3 weeks in a row, they've just become a manager. So it's being on top and actually understanding what's the vision of an agile team. It's a team working together in a fun environment.
As you move on,
where
Riccardo,
they're all taking responsibility.
I'm incredibly proud
so
of
in a
every
way,
single person
you're being a shepherd, or
It's
you're,
such a
you're
privilege for us to
guiding
spend this time
your team
together.
into
Any in this class
the
of
best
folks that
practices,
wrote
but
to
you
have
need to be
this
aware
class,
of what they are. So it's
but they
constantly
start
reading about
they're in
agile,
teams
constantly
of
looking at other
5,
teams and how they work.
and each of them have a project that they've been assigned
I don't know.
to solve a problem.
Yeah.
They're completely free to co-create how they organize, when they meet. And even now that you have these titles, Scrum Master, you can change that title. You can rotate. You can choose now to say we'll have a rotating. How you do that, we're going to leave it up to you. You are completely free. But you have the guidelines of what some of the folks have. So feel free to do that. Meet before and after. When they come to class, you have your operating rhythm of what you choose. How do you make your work visible when you come in the morning? Do you put your backlog on? How do you practice that? How do you refine that? But what's your advice to the team as they are preparing for their project? They'll deliver it, their presentation and paper, as they come together, learning from one another. The guidelines of what some of the folks have. Have your operating of what you see. How do you make your work visible from your work? How do you find that? But what's your advice to the team as they are preparing for the presentation? As they come together, learning from one another. Up to them how they want to do it. Together, whatever.
Be ruthless in your feedback, but be incredibly polite in the way you deliver it, to each other, because you're trying to get the best out of each other. And just think of yourselves as my job. Each person who's not doing the presentation has to be a great coach, and take on a leadership role of actually coaching the person who's doing the presentation to help them. Is each person in each group doing a presentation?
Open it up for some reflections, so not questions, but reflections from you. Before we do that, some terrific feedback from this table.
And I think,
Professor, by the
really
way,
encouraging any team members who don't speak up much to speak up.
On your own, this is your time.
Taking
However,
much more of a Socratic approach and asking questions.
So it seems that there are 2 assignments due next week.
Answers, try to draw out the answers.
I'm going to move that.
especially
Only
for the person
ING
who's going
is
to
due
be
next week, so we will
doing the
move that
presentation.
deliverable. And questions for that will be posted this week.
Yeah, I think it's very
Thank
exciting.
you for that feedback. With that, what an incredible, I have to tell you, I have spent a lot of time, because we spent years interviewing people and getting to it, but I learned so much today based from you in the brilliant questions you asked, your terrific participation, but also from Riccardo. But let's get some reflections. Bullet point elevator pitches. One thing you took away, if you had a sentence, this is hard, it's easy to make 10 sentences. Let's go, rapid fire. Takeaways, what stood out for you from this journey? This is Riccardo's part. May not be your part. You may not even agree with some of the things. But what do we take away? What did you take away? A nugget that you took away? Anyone wants to kick off? Who wants to kick off? Say.
The agile is for every kind of industry, not only for TI. So it's interesting how it develops the strategy to adapt in a restaurant, and also how it's inspiring for other people in other kind of industries.
Perfect elevator pitch. Who else? Quick comments. Yes.
It's okay to be the first person to try something new. Like, trying agility in restaurant business is completely new.
Wonderful. Who else? Yes.
The flexibility on leadership, being able to switch from anarchy all the way to be a dictatorship, I think it shows a lot of character.
Eliminate roles to foster collaboration and sense of responsibility.
Need roles to foster collaboration.
A strong backbone in both education and morals and goals can help you become more flexible and be ready for any situation.
Create an environment to fail, but make sure that you have the ability to pull back.
The comments stood out in your mind. Check.
Agile is a lot more focused on allowing people to be happy and focused on humanities than I had initially thought. I thought Agile was more about improving the bottom line for the business, but now I realize it's more focused on the human aspect of the work.
Anyone from this table? This table? Yes. More? Who else? Reflections? Wait, we had you. Yes, we'll come back. Talia?
I would say that communication can solve a lot of problems.
So your head.
Yeah, agile is the idea, but implementation is everything. So adjustment is the way to keep adjusting.
Great comment. Other comments? Other comments? Yes, Lola.
Increasing the workload at the beginning can have long-term benefits that eventually decrease the workload of each employee.
Very interesting. Yes.
This case really just solidified that happy teams. This case really just solidified that happy teams are more productive.
Teams are more productive. Final thoughts? More comments? Take a couple more. More. Coming to you now. A couple more. Yes.
So it's good to surround yourself with people who, like, agile is a big transformation. So if you surround yourself with people who are believers of it, you will get that validation. You'll know where you're going right, where you're not going right.
For me, Riccardo, I think it was a brilliant case and it was a great learning experience, not only for me, but for the whole class. But at the same time, it would be great because with any new practice comes some sort of risk. And as students, of management, we want to be able to understand that risk and analyze it. So I want to be able to understand how risk is, accounted for when we go agile. So I'm hoping that to learn that in this process. But it was a brilliant case, and thank you so much for being here with us.
As we close, final comments from you, because the whole course is about how do we take the risk spectrum and through our practices, mindset, and insight, reduce the risk of failure, the risk of not reaching our outcomes, and increasing it. Can you ever eliminate risk?
No.
Right? It's just like, how do you stop shoplifting in a massive supermarket chain? The only way.
Close it.
Close the business. Then you'll have zero. So how you manage that in terms of your systems is going to be important. Parting comment and advice to this amazing group of leaders at Thunderbird.
Thank you.
Just like how do you stop shoplifting in a massive supermarket chain? Close the business. You have zero. How you manage that in terms of the system? How do you call it?
Well, just start straight away. Don't try to waterfall plan your agile transformation.
Riccardo,
just
take this time to
start
invest
and let
in
it
us
evolve. Let
with all of
the
your
next
businesses
step
and leadership
emerge
roles.
once you've taken the
So
first
grateful.
step.
Thank you.
And come to London if you're in London and you want to visit the restaurant. Please just get in touch with Professor. I'm sure he'll put you in touch with me, and just come and visit the restaurant. And whether I'm there or not, I can introduce you to my team, and they'd be very happy to show you around. Well, it's a great honor. Thank you. Thank you.